Good morning, everybody. It is the 25th day of Tammuz in the Hebrew year 5782. It's Sunday, July 24th. Let me welcome you to the Spanish Inquisition Remembrance Ceremony. We will be going through this program that you see in front of us, but I would like to start off by saying offering my great thanks to all who have been so deeply involved with this program. Our speaker, Dr. Seth Ward, also so deeply involved with this is Sarah Ruth J. Marquez, who has been so actively involved, Jessica Richmond as our Zoom host, Dr. Bruce Dinner, who will be sounding the shofar, Roman Camacho, who will be reciting the Kaddish de Duelo. At the end of this whole program, on page 16, there's a list of all who are involved. So thank you to all who have been participating in this. We're going to turn now to what will be page 3. What you see there is the sounds of the shofar. The tekiah sound is the sound that announces an important occasion. The shivarim sound is the note broken into 3, signaling that something is broken. And the teruah sound is 9 quick notes signaling the alarm of approaching danger. And I'm now going to call out these 3 sounds, and Dr. Bruce Dinner will be sounding the shofar as I call on these words. Tekiah, shivarim, teruah. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. In the middle now of the page, Deuteronomy 6 expresses the central concept of the faith of Israel. There is but one God. We worship the one God alone. In the Hebrew, you will notice that there are 2 letters which are of a larger font, the ayin and the daled, and those 2 words spell out the word aid, which means witness. In a terribly fragmented world, we give witness to God's oneness. So let us recite the Shema together. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. The next part of the program will be that Dr. Seth Ward is going to be giving an address, and people who wish to offer a question to Dr. Ward about his lecture may do so by clicking on the add a comment part of the Zoom. YouTube may ask you to choose or open an account to do so, and Dr. Ward will then respond briefly to as many of the questions at the end of the ceremony. So that will come at the end. Dr. Ward is going to give his lecture in a moment's time. The lecture itself is dealing with the question of remembering the expulsion of Jews from Spain and the Inquisition with its tribunals and executions. Dr. Ward is going to then address this whole matter, and I turn it over to Dr. Ward.
Thank you. Hear, O earth and heavens, and I will weep many tears for the destruction of thousands from the day I left Jerusalem. There will be an especially great wailing for the year 1391. For the community of Seville was destroyed, and many communities in Castile. The communities of all the people of Andalusia and Provincia were struck by evil. Catalonia was disgraced together with Aragon. The prophet Dan Yehuda ben David Negro ibn Yahya wrote this, and several other laments to mark the tragic events of Kof Non Aleph, 1391. Anti-Jewish riots erupted all over Spain. The Spanish Inquisition came into effect almost 100 years later, and the Edict of Expulsion a few years after that. In many ways, though, we need to start with 1391 or even earlier. The placement of this ceremony of remembrance is during the 3 weeks, as it's usually called, between Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, the 17th of Tammuz, and Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. The riots of 1391 started in the month of Tammuz. The expulsion became official about the Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, a day or two before. So it's a very appropriate time to remember this whole story. You might think that this is an old issue from 500 years ago, but it's a living issue in the hearts and minds of many people today. 500 years after the expulsion in 1992, there was a wave of interest among people of Spanish heritage in the question of the Inquisition, and a wave of interest among Jews who had always remembered the Spanish Inquisition and the rise of individuals derogatorily called Marranos. Later on this morning, we will hear a rendition of a very well-known Yiddish song, Zog Maran. Tell us, O Marrano, how do you keep Judaism today? Where the subject of the story is succeeded in hiding Haggadah in a cave, and says that if he's discovered and has to, he'll become a martyr for the faith. So it was sung in many communities, many Jewish communities on Passover as a remembrance of this period of time. A few words about the history of the Jewish community in Spain. Sephardic tradition suggests that the prophet Ovadia referred to Sfarad, chapter 1, the only chapter, verse 20, as the place of the exile of the nobles of Jerusalem, and suggests that the community of Jews in Spain was founded already 2,600 years ago. We don't have any historical references that go beyond that, but we do have historical references during the Roman Empire period, about 300 Christian era. We know the Jews were, there was a Jewish population. It grew and flourished. When the kings of Spain and the post-Roman times, the Visigothic conquerors, adopted Roman Catholicism, there were persecutions. Some people suggest that the Kol Nidre that forms the central part of the Yom Kippur service was written in part because of a wave of forced conversion, even in Visigothic times. Visigothic times came to an end in 711 Christian era, 711 CE, when the Arab conquerors crossed the Straits of the Straits of Gibraltar into Spain. Some sources indicate that the Jews welcomed them in hopes of removing the persecution of the Visigothic kings. In general, Jews lived in Spain in peace during the first centuries of the Muslim Spain, of the Arab domination. Some even rose to prominent positions. The most prominent of them may have been Shmuel HaNagid, Samawal ibn Nagrela in Arabic, who became effectively the chief of the armies, leading the armies into war, and the chief counselor of the king in Granada. But his son, Yehosef HaNagid, suffered from what may have been the first pogrom in the history of Islamic Spain in 1066. It was deposed by anti-Jewish riots. There's a well-known poem. Actually, there are well-known poems in Hebrew and in Arabic about this. In the 1140s, the Almohades entered into Spain. They were not the first extremist group to have done so. But there was a wave of crypto-Judaism. Moses Maimonides is rumored to have become a Muslim, and a wave of people who left Spain because of the persecutions. Judah Halevi moved from Spain. He had talked about moving to Israel, what today we would call Israel, moving to Palestine. I am in the West, but my heart is in the East, his famous poem. He left about 1140, and the well-known Bible commentator Abraham ibn Ezra left in 1140 as well. And this may have been what sparked his writing. Abraham ibn Ezra wrote an elegant lament about the persecution. Aha yarad alei Sefarad. Woe has fallen upon Spain, to remember this. Things worsened as Christians came to control more of the Iberian Peninsula. In the 1200s, battles in Navas de Tolosa and other places meant that the Christian Reconquista was nearly complete. The city-state of Granada was left in Islamic hands, but the rest became under Christian control. The situation was still better than it was in many parts of Europe, where Jews were being persecuted and expelled and blamed for all sorts of things. It had not yet come to that in Spain. And in fact, in the middle of the 1200s, Alfonso El Sabio convened a translation and philosophic school, which included Jews, Christians, and Muslims who were experts in Arabic and Hebrew and Latin, to translate some of the central works of science that were known in those days. In the late 1200s, we know that conversion to Christianity had become serious enough that King Jaime in Barcelona called Ramban, Moses ben Nachman, to a dialogue with a converted Jew, Nachmanides. Moses ben Nachman won the dialogue, as it were, won the disputation, but he was forced to leave, as did a number of his contemporaries. And they went to the land of Israel as well. They went to, many of them went to Akko, to Acre, as it's called, and had a very successful community there until the end of the 1200s. Things got more difficult in Spain in the 1300s. And in the middle of the century, we read about a civil war between Peter the Cruel and Henry of Trastamara, with massacres of Jews and mass conversions, and the first emergence of the derogatory term Marranos for new Christians who lived in a certain amount of security in Toledo and Madrid and other places, but were nevertheless suffering a certain amount of antipathy. Henry, however, needed the Jews and attempted to limit the preaching of violence, attempted to limit forced conversion. A preacher named Ferran Martinez began preaching against Jews in 1378. The Archbishop and the King of Castile in those days, Juan I, prevented him from going very far with this, but they both died in 1390, and Martinez seized the opportunity. The riots began in Seville in March of 1391, and in June 6th of that year, the first day of the month of Tammuz, the riots turned deadly. Reports differ, but some report as many as 4,000 Jews murdered in Seville. The riots spread quickly. By Rosh Hashanah, 3 months later, some 70 cities had been affected. Tens of thousands of Jews were murdered or raped or converted to Christianity. In Valencia, for example, we read that 90% of the Jewish community of over 2,000 was murdered or converted. The king of Aragon was able to protect some of the Jews of his capital, Saragossa, but not much more than that. Estimates go to as many as 50,000 Jews murdered in Castile alone, and 100,000 to 200,000 converted in the Iberian Peninsula. I read a work of the poet earlier, the Yehuda ben Yachia. He escaped to Portugal, where he served in the royal household, and was one of a number of authors who wrote dirges recording the tragic chapter. Old Christians did not always welcome the new converts. Some worried that former Jews were successfully competing against their own traditional interests and the sources of income. But some Christians did welcome them, and some of the new Christians became very faithful. Even after 1391, it was relatively easy for conversos, Jews who would openly convert to Catholicism, to show up in church and celebrate Christian holidays in public, but also maintain kosher homes and Jewish practices in private. That would stop with the Inquisition and its ramifications in the 1480s. Profiat Duran, for example, is famous for two works, Al Tihi Kavotecha, Do Not Be Like Your Fathers, and Klimata Goyim, The Shame of the Nations, both of which ultimately lambasted Christianity. Do Not Be Like Your Fathers was a kind of satiric work that Jews reading it would say, well, don't be like your fathers who had a rational religion and didn't worship wood and stone. And the work was not proscribed by the authorities for that reason. It's clear from the introduction that both Duran and his colleague who helped him write the book, one of his friends and buddies, according to the introduction, were openly Christians, even though they were secretly Jews and wrote in Hebrew and continued to be active. But his colleague, Bongiorno, was convinced to join the true faith by another one of the conversos of 1391. The estimates of the number of new Christians in the 1300s are problematic. There may have been as many as 200,000 or more. We have no idea of how many of them became believing Christians. But in the 1400s, the situation became more difficult. Vicente Ferrer single-handedly converted 25,000 Jews from the 1390s to his death in 1419. Jewish tradition especially remembers one set of preaching in 1412, Kof Ayin Bet Ka'ov. Nevertheless, again, it was still possible, as it was not possible in Europe at that time, for Jews to serve in the royal courts and for Jews to maintain activities. And for Jews who were secret Christians, very often were able, Jews who were openly Christians were very often able to observe some aspects of Judaism. As I said, this stopped with the Inquisition. The papal proclamation of Pope Sixtus IV on November 1st of 1478 established the Spanish Inquisition. The first inquisitors were appointed in 1480, and the first autos da fe, acts of faith, occurred in 1481. Autos da fe typically included persons who were secretly practicing Judaism, who had been denounced to the Inquisition and had been convicted of practicing Judaism, and they were burned at the stake. Those who showed some remorse were often garroted. That means they were killed before they were burned. Others who showed no remorse were left to suffer the pain of being burnt alive. Now, the Inquisition very often forgave people the first offense, but not for the second offense. And presumably I'll get to some of that in a moment. 90 to 100% of proceedings in the first period of the Inquisition concerned Judaizing. The symbolic role as an oppressor of persons of Jewish heritage informs much of the modern resurgence of identification with Jewish heritage among persons of Spanish ancestry. The Inquisition very quickly developed a reputation for its excesses, and Pope Sixtus himself condemned the excesses already in 1482, within a year or so of the Spanish Inquisition coming into force. Ferdinand and Isabella were both very young. They were both descendants of Juan I of Castile. They married in 1469. They would maintain separate administration, but they attempted to unify Aragon and Castile, both under administration, not yet complete. In 1492, there were separate edicts of expulsion for both, and to unify it religiously. That's part of the reason why they were so interested in having everybody be Catholic. I don't know exactly what was the most important reason they applied to the Pope to establish the Spanish Inquisition. There are many theories, deeply religious motives, political motives, simple as the goal of unifying the realm, and some indicate the role of Tomas de Torquemada, the chief inquisitor and the personal confessor of the king and queen. We have to remember, in all fairness, that the Inquisition, by medieval standards, was extremely organized and just according to its rules, and formal and followed rules and regulations. This was not always the case in Europe in the Middle Ages. They had regulations. You had a chance to have representation. You were able to respond to the charges. In theory, they limited torture in time allowed, and that they only used it to extract confessions from those whose guilt hadn't been proved beyond a reasonable doubt, and they especially kept careful records. I don't want to whitewash the Inquisition, but I think we should be aware that in the context of the medieval world, you didn't necessarily get justice anywhere at that time. Typically, as I mentioned, a repeat offender was judged to be insincere in his repentance and given little mercy, but a first-time offender was given a chance. Also, not always typically allowed in medieval justice. Those people who were convicted by the Inquisition were relaxed to the state. This is a Latin term which means transfer. And I think it's important to remember that it was the crown and not the church that actually conducted the executions. The church theoretically did not do it. Autos da fe were great public displays in which victims were burned at the stake. Visiting royalty might be given the honor of lighting the pyre. The idea was that it would be a very, very public ceremony that would inspire fear of Judaizing among the people who saw it. The number of people who were executed may not be as large as you think. Some scholars suggest that there were fewer than 3,000 who were executed, which is less than the estimates of the number of Jews murdered in the riots of 1391 alone. But you don't need an awful lot of people to be burned at the stake in public to create a climate of fear. We know this today from modern terrorists. You kill one or two people, you kill, schools, for example, in the United States are very, very safe. But we don't think so, because every year there are a couple of people who shoot up school population. I'll point out that the first period of the Inquisition lasted for the generation of those people who had been alive when Judaism was allowed in Spain, and the Inquisition came to Portugal in 1497 when there were quite a few Jews who moved across the border into Portugal. King Manuel wanted to marry the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella and proscribed Judaism and converted everybody en masse in 1497, but the Inquisition didn't really start. The term Spanish Portuguese Jews referred to Spanish Jews who had moved to Portugal, became Portuguese, as it were, and after 1537 began leaving Portugal Judaism openly, which was no longer possible in Spain. I don't know how many Jews were in Spain in 1492 during the time of the Inquisition. There are many, many different estimates. Probably 40,000 Jews or more left Spain, and many Jews converted. Was from the end of that first generation up to the 1600s. Just for example, the mid-1600s. For example, the last Inquisition case, which resulted in a large auto da fe of Jews in the New World, was 1640 in Mexico. And at least in the New World, from 1650 onward, the Inquisition rarely conducted. Most of the persons of Jewish heritage, or for that matter, persons of non-Jewish heritage who married into such families, and sometimes were more enthusiastic about things like Kashrut and Shabbat than the born Jews in the families. Most of them had ceased to have any identification with Judaism in any open way. I should mention one or two final comments before turning to some other issues. The Inquisition was established in many places where Spain and Portugal had some role as a colonial ruler. This included New Spain, Mexico, Florida, Texas, and so on. Lima and Cartagena and Buenos Aires, Brazil, were the Portuguese Inquisition. Also in the Philippines, and occasionally we even hear of the Inquisition in places like Goa and some of the other Portuguese colonies in Asia. I understand I'm having some problems with the audio. I'm going to see if I can help with that. I'm sorry about that. Many speak about the lack of awareness of the expulsion of Spanish Jewry and in general the Spanish Inquisition. This may in fact be true today, and may have been true among people of Spanish heritage, but it was not true among Jews of recent generations. The valiant attempts of forcibly converted Jews to maintain loyalty to Jewish practice and belief in the face of rampant cultural religious assimilation was a trope that was particularly attractive to Jewish communities staring down rapid acculturation in the 20th century. Biographies of heroes who resisted or returned to Judaism were popular. Secular Jews sang in Yiddish about the hidden Jews, Zog Moran. The poem was by Raisin and Bugash. Stories and plays were written about them, much first-rate scholarship. A couple of plays by Sholem Asch about Marranos were very popular in the Yiddish world. Much as African Americans sometimes proudly refer to themselves using the derogatory N-word, the M word, as it says, was used by Jewish sources not as a term of shame and a derogatory term, but as a badge of honor. These Jewish sources did not understand Spanish, and perhaps they didn't resonate quite the same way. These days, the reports that I hear from persons of both Jewish and Spanish heritage is that the stories of the Inquisition and of Jews who returned to Judaism were forgotten or suppressed in an attempt to eradicate their memory. But we are here today to help overcome this erasure and to reverse the suppression of this identity. Many people say our ancestors became Catholic because of the Inquisition, and there is a great degree of truth in that. The Inquisition did not convert any Jews, but the Inquisition very clearly did make the case for converted Jews becoming true Catholics. Few more comments along this theory, and then turn it back to the ceremony. The connection with Tisha B'Av is very strong. There have been some laments that have been written about the Spanish exile, which are part of some Sephardic traditions. Rabbi Stephen Leon and Rabbi Juan Mejia published a booklet about 10 years ago for the conservative movement, which talks very much about the Inquisition as part of the Tisha B'Av remembrance. I've heard of something called the Black Legend, something that conveyed the message that Spain was uniquely evil and that the Inquisition was part of that. The notion that the Inquisition was terribly evil is, I think, very much a part of this notion, and we should remember that and remember their victims. There is a return to Judaism that's related somehow to both genealogy and genetics, and to politics. In Spain and Portugal a couple of years ago, both governments opened up what I'll call birthright citizenship programs, where hundreds, if not thousands, of persons who could prove genealogically that they are descendants of conversos who left Spain for the New World or for other places were offered Spanish citizenship. The Portuguese program was especially active with courts in Lisbon and in Porto processing hundreds and hundreds of applications. In recent times, Spain was originally encouraging for crypto Jews, much more welcoming for Jews who had left Spain to go to places like Turkey and the Middle East and North Africa, but not at all welcoming to Jews who had converted and become true Christians, whose ancestors had converted and become true Catholics. Nevertheless, it's a large movement. Genetically speaking, there have been genetic studies that show that among the general Spanish populations, both in the New World and in Spain, there's an enormous amount of what we'll call Jewish genes, Jewish genetics. Some studies have shown as much as 20% of the populations have significant genetic markers associated with Judaism, which means that 4 or 5 times, 80 to 100% of those numbers show Jewish genealogy. I'd like to end this by indicating that today there is a sense among some people who are part of the modern emergence of persons of Spanish identity identifying with Judaism. There is a sense that this is something in their genes or in their genealogy. American Jews, at least, have known for 80 years that ultimately in the United States, Judaism is part heritage and part faith, but also is a matter of choice. And persons of Spanish ancestry who choose to identify with Judaism are making that type of a choice. Salo Barone, the most famous historian of Judaism in the mid-20th century, wrote in 1960, in the ultimate sense, it is the subjective decision of the individual concerned and the equally subjective opinion of his neighbors, which is almost as important as the objective facts of descent and religious commitment. And I would maintain that today we are seeing a very important recognition in both the American Jewish non-Sephardic community and among persons of Spanish heritage of the importance of the history of the Jews of Spain and of remembering and commemorating the horrors of the Inquisition and the effects that it had. I'd like to thank very much Sarah Ruth for putting this together, Jessica for monitoring the Zoom, which we could not have done it without you, Jessica, and Rabbi Zucker and Dr. Dinner and all the others, Roman and so on, who have helped this. And I'm sorry if the connection at some point was unstable. As was noted, I'll try to respond if there are any comments in to the YouTube link at the end of the ceremony. Thank you very much.
Dr. Ward, thank you very, very much for this wonderful talk on the Spanish Inquisition history, heritage, misconceptions, and modern legacies. Very, very fine talk. Thank you very much. We're now going to continue in our program. If we turn to page number 4, excellent. We're going to look at or read together these tragic events associated with Tisha B'Av. And I would ask everybody who is on to read these words with me. When Israel accepted the evil report of the 10 scouts, the wandering generation was forbidden to enter the promised land. The first temple, built by King Solomon, was destroyed by the Babylonians. The second temple was destroyed by the Romans under Titus. The Bar Kokhba revolt was crushed by the Roman Emperor Hadrian when he destroyed the last Jewish stronghold of Beitar. Roman governor Turnus Rufus ordered the Temple Mount plowed under and all Jews expelled and banned from Jerusalem. He dedicated it to pagan gods and renamed the city Aelia Capitolina. Pope Urban II declared the First Crusade. 10,000 Jews were killed in the first month, and every Jewish community among its roots was obliterated. The Jews of England were expelled with accompanying destruction and confiscation of books and property. As we learned, the Jews of Spain were expelled in 1492. Many who converted in order to stay and practice Judaism secretly became subject to the Inquisition, which tortured thousands and burned them at the stake. World War I broke out on the eve of Tisha B'Av. The end of the war in 1918 saw over 400 pogroms in Ukraine, in Hungary, Poland, and Russia, and the German defeat set the stage for World War II. Mass deportation of the Jews of the Warsaw Ghetto to Treblinka concentration camp began on the eve of Tisha B'Av in 1942. Finally, the deadly bombing of the Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires, Argentina, killed 86 people and wounded about 300 more in 1994. We turn now to the next page in our program, which has a reading from the book of Eicha, the book of Lamentations. I will ask Dr. Ward to read the Hebrew, and then Dr. Dinner, if you would read the lines in English. Dr. Ward.
ישבה ודד, העיר בת ים הייתה כאלמנה, רבתי בגויים, שרתי במדינות, הייתה למס.
How deserted lies the city, once so full of people. How like a window is she, who once was great among the nations. She who was queen among the provinces has now become a slave. Bitterly she weeps at night. Tears are on her cheeks. Among all her lovers, there is no one to comfort her. All her friends have betrayed her. They have become her critics. Her foes have become her masters. Her enemies are at ease. God has brought her grief because of her many sins. Her children have gone into exile, captive before the foe. All the splendor has departed from daughter Zion. Her princes are like deer that find no pasture. In weakness, they have fled.
We thank you very much, Dr. Ward, Dr. Dinner. We turn now to pages 6 and 7, where we have the Sephardic Kaddish, and we're going to read the Kaddish and intersperse them, first the Hebrew, and then we're going to name names of various communities. So please, again, join me. Yit Gadal, Granada.
Granada.
Vayit Kadash, Sevilla.
Seville.
Shemei Rabbah.
Toledo.
The Alma Divrachirute. Avila.
Avila.
Vayamlich Malchute.
Cordoba.
Yatzmach Orkana. Segovia.
Segovia.
Yikrav Mashiach. Amen.
Medina del Campo.
Medina del Campo. Bachayecho.
Zaragoza.
Uviomechon.
Burgos.
Bachay de Chol Beit Yisrael.
Valencia.
Agala Rizman Kariv.
Barcelona.
Be'imaru. Amen.
Amen.
Yehei Shmei
Shmei Rabbah Mevorach La'alam Ula'almei Amaya.
Yit Barach Vayish Tabach.
Corona.
Vayit Pa'ar Vayit Romam.
Salamat.
Vayit Naseh Vayit Hadar. Bilbao. Vayit Aleh Vayit Alal. Leor. Shemei de Kudisha.
Murcia.
Barichu. Amen.
Amen.
Leola min kol beruchta v'shirata. Belgrade.
Belgrade.
Pushpachata v'nechamata.
Lima.
Amiran be'alma
Mexico.
Amen. Mexico.
Amen.
Continue reading on the next page. Yehei Shlama
Shlama Rabbah Min Shemaya. Hayim Besava Biba Nehama Vishezava Ugeula Urefuah Usalifa Vechava Revach Hatzala Lanu
L'chol Amo
Yisrael Vimeru. Amen.
Oseh
Oseh Shalom Bin Romav Hu Virachamav Yaseh Shalom Aleinu Yakol Yisrael Bimeru. Amen.
Amen. And please now join with me as we read the English translation of the Sephardic Kaddish. Let the glory of God be extolled. Let God's great name be hallowed in the world, whose creation God willed. May God's dominion soon prevail. God's salvation
flourish,
and God's anointed one arrive soon in our day, our own lives, and the life of all Israel. And let us say, Amen.
Amen.
Let God's great
Great
name
name
be blessed forever and ever. Let the name of the Holy One, praise God, be glorified,
exalted,
honored,
uplifted, praised, sung,
and
and
worshiped. Blessed be
blessed
God.
be God.
Amen.
Amen.
Though God is
God
beyond
is
all
beyond
praises,
the praise,
song,
adoration,
exaltation,
exaltation, and glorifications
that
that we could utter.
let
Let
us
us
say,
say,
Amen.
Amen.
May
Great
great
peace
from heaven,
life,
help, salvation, comfort,
comfort,
refuge,
refuge, healing, redemption, pardon, atonement,
plenty
plenty, and success
be
be granted
to
to
us
and to all people of Israel.
And let
And
us
let
say,
that, Amen.
Amen. May the one
May the one who makes peace in the high heavens
in
in
mercy
mercy bring peace
upon
upon
us,
us,
Israel,
and let us say, Amen.
The next pages will be the Kaddish Titkabal, which will be recited by Roman Camacho, pages 10 and 11 in this program. Roman.
Magnificado y santificado sea su gran nombre
Amén.
en este mundo que Él ha creado en conformidad con su voluntad, que Él establezca su reinado durante su vida y durante la vida de toda la casa de Israel, en breve, y digamos, amén.
Amén.
Que su gran nombre sea bendecido por siempre y por toda la eternidad, bendecido, alabado, glorificado y exaltado, honrado, magnificado y loado, que el nombre del Santo bendito sea. Amén. Él es el más grande que todas las bendiciones, los himnos, las alabanzas y las consolaciones que puedan pronunciarse en este mundo, y digamos, amén.
Amén.
Que abundante paz del cielo descienda sobre nosotros y que la vida sea renovada para nosotros y para todo Israel, y digamos, amén.
Amén.
El que hace la paz en los cielos, que haga la paz para nosotros y para todo Israel, y digamos, amén.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much. We turn now to page 12 and 13 in our program, and I'm going to ask that Sarah Ruth J. Marquez will sing for us this Yiddish song traditionally sung in unison on Passover by Ashkenazi and Sephardi Jews, the song known as Zog Maran. And I will ask Sarah Ruth J. Marquez to please recite this, to sing this for us. Sarah Ruth, please.
Yes. Zog Maran, du Bruder meine, who is great, der Seder deine. In tiefer Heer, hineinkehren, dort hab ich gegräht mein Seder. Sag Maran, mir bei wem wirst du weiße Matzos nehmen? In der Heer auf Gottes Maroden, und mein Weib nimmt es genommen. In der Heer auf Gottes Maroden, und mein Weib nimmt es genommen. Sag Maran, wie wir sie klingen, aha, Gott, zu kriegen. In der Hell im Teppich walten, hab ich sie schon lang behalten. Sag mal an, wie das sie werden, men wird deine Gott der Herr. Wenn der Säune wird mich fangen, will ich kämpfen mit Gesangen. Wenn der Säune wird mich fangen, will ich kämpfen mit Gesangen.
Sarah Ruth
Thank
J. Marquez, that was wonderful. Thank you very much. We are going to continue now with the Birkat Kohanim, the priestly blessing, which is found on page 13 of your program. And I'm going to ask Dr. Seth Ward, please, to recite for us the priestly blessing.
Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha.
Amen.
Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'yichuneka.
Amen.
Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May God bless you and keep you. May God's presence shine on you. May God's face turn towards you and give you peace.
Excellent. We come now to the close of our program. After the program concludes, there will be the opportunity for questions and answers via the chat mode and so forth, where you may add a comment. Again, YouTube may ask you to choose or open an account to do so, and Dr. Ward will try to address these various questions. Again, special thanks to Dr. Ward for his address, to Roman Camacho, Sarah Ruth J. Marquez, Dr. Bruce Dinner for the shofar sounds, Jessica Richmond for her Zoom expertise, Giselle Workman, and special thanks to Dr. Martin Klaus, who worked so very, very hard to set up both the poster design and this program. Thank you all for attending. And now we're going to conclude the ceremony part with the sounding of the shofar by Dr. Bruce Dinner. And then we'll turn this over to Dr. Seth Ward for any kinds of questions, answers. Thank you all for participating. And I will conclude with the calling out of the words, Tekia Gedola. And we conclude and we turn it now over. Thank you, Dr. Dinner. Thank you, Dr. Seth Ward. We turn it over to you for answering questions via the add a comment in the chat and so forth. All to everyone, thank you for your participation and good wishes.
Well, there are no questions at this time. Thanks to Jessica, and I also have been monitoring the YouTube channel. If anybody would like to ask questions at this time, I'm happy to discuss among either the presenters or the general public. And if not, I will reiterate our thanks. Jessica Richmond has been wonderful as a Zoom moderator. It's sometimes forgotten how important this is and how difficult it is to make it work as smoothly as possible. So I think all of us owe a debt of gratitude to Jessica for stepping in on this. I am personally thankful in many ways to her and her family.
And I fully agree, and thank you. And again, thanks to all who were involved, from programming to support, to the talks, to the shofar sounds, to the chanting. This has been a wonderful experience. Good wishes. Thank you all. Blessing and goodness. And may we remember this tragic and important part of our Jewish heritage. Shalom uvracha. There we have the names. Excellent. Great appreciation to all. Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye and good wishes.
Shalom.